Okay, I think we will, if it's okay, Abby and Kristen will start. Now we're at, including the presenters, we're over 100, which is a fantastic number to get, and from such a wide range of stakeholders. My name is Donald Henderson. I'm one of the Deputy Directors in Natural Resources Division in the Environment Directorate in the Scottish Government. Now the meeting today, I think you'll all know, it's a continuation of conversations about nature networks and 30 by 30. And of course, it's set in the context of the biodiversity consultation that we issued a week or two ago. I hope you're all aware of that. I hope you know that you have until about the middle of September to feed in your views. We will assess those responses thereafter, but we know already that implementation is going to be one of the key issues that we need to address. So in the context of nature networks and 30 by 30, we and NatureScot in today's meeting are starting these conversations in parallel. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversations. But before we come to them, we're very lucky to have Lorna Slater, the Minister for Green Skills, Circular Economy and Biodiversity. So Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Donald, for the introduction. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this session, which builds on the excellent discussions we've had over the past few months. I'm very pleased that you're all contributing to a new vision for biodiversity and to our goals of halting, restoring and regenerating Scotland's biodiversity. Creating climate resistant landscapes that are nature rich, highly connected, and that deliver multiple benefits for people and the economy. All of us here know very well the urgent need to address the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. We know that transformative change is needed to deliver action by everyone at local, national, and global levels. Last week, countries came together to continue negotiations on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The world urgently needs a high ambition outcome from COP15 when that finally goes ahead this December. In Scotland, we are pressing ahead with our aspirations to halt biodiversity loss by 2030 and substantially reverse it by 2045. We've seen a 24% decline in nature over the last 30 years. It's clear that despite our best efforts, current conservation approaches are not enough. A new, bigger, better, more joined up landscape scale approach is needed, which is why we've committed to both protecting 30% of our land by nature by 2030. That's the 30 by 30 target, and enabling a nature network in every local authority area of Scotland. These commitments will allow for the creation and enhancement of nature corridors, as well as the landscape scale protection and restoration that is needed to meet our climate and nature targets. The consultation seeking your views on our new Scottish biodiversity strategy was published on the 20th of June, as Donald referred to. This sets out our ambitious vision for biodiversity and a set of outcomes which try to envision what achieving that vision would look like for Scotland across our landscapes and marine environments. What does good look like? What does the future look like? I'd encourage you to look at the consultation and promote it widely if you've not already done so, and I very much look forward to seeing your comments on what we've envisioned. To support the strategy's long-term goals, we are developing the first of a series of delivery plans. Delivery will require partnerships, collaboration, and engagement across our society. We need everyone to understand the issues and the impacts that their choices have on biodiversity across all levels of government, as well as private, voluntary, and public sectors. In line with our strategic approach, we are undertaking a co-design approach to identify areas which could contribute appropriately to that 30 by 30 commitment, as well as opportunities to create ecological connectivity at local and regional levels. I have to sincerely thank you for your contributions so far to that process. I know that there's a wide variety of views on how to progress. It is clear from the many conversations which I've had since coming into office that there is a lot of expertise across Scotland to draw on to deliver for nature. Many of you are working hard with local communities, with local government to address local and national biodiversity priorities, and I am keen to harness that expertise and willingness as we drive this forward. I'm also clear that government needs to play a role in enabling local and regionally driven action. That is why the Scottish Government and NatureScot are working closely to develop overarching policy frameworks, guidance, and delivery plans to support the Scottish biodiversity strategy. There are many government-led strategies and mechanisms that can help us deliver for nature. Regional land use partnerships are one example. We must embed consideration of positive outcomes for biodiversity across national policy and delivery, which is a key element of the conditions for success that we have identified to support delivery of our strategic vision and outcomes. I'm really keen to hear from local authorities about the challenges of delivering positive benefits for biodiversity through mechanisms like local biodiversity action plans and local development plans, and to identify how we can help. Crucially, it is the expertise, knowledge, and advice of landowners, land stewards, and land users that will ultimately direct action on the ground, addressing local priorities and identifying areas which are ripe for partnerships to deliver local and regional connectivity. We in government are clear that our role is to facilitate your delivery activities. We need your help to develop the right national frameworks through which we can arrive at our destination. Today's event is about setting the scene for our emerging 30 by 30 and Nature Network commitments, and I hope this will enthuse your participation in working alongside us to deliver this critical work. This is the most urgent of times, and we must take urgent and bold actions. Scotland has led the way in developing the Edinburgh Declaration for Biodiversity and in this UN decade of ecosystem restoration. We must now work collectively to deliver those pledges at all levels of government and across the whole of society, to restore nature at scale, to protect and connect our habitats, to ensure that wildlife is given the space to adapt in response to the effects of climate change. Thank you, and I hope you have a great session today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Slater. That is extremely beneficial and sets the scene beautifully for our discussions this afternoon. Thank you also, Donald, for introducing the session today. And I think this is going to get us off to an excellent start. My role today, I'm Eileen Stewart, and I'm Deputy Director for Nature and Climate within NatureScot. So I will be leading the team that will be taking this forward in partnership with Donald and colleagues in Scottish Government. So my role today is just as sort of convener for the discussion, and I will help try and lead us through what I think is going to be a very interesting programme of different contributions from different speakers. So I'll just give you a kind of brief insight to how we're going to run the session, and then I'll hand you over to my colleague Ben Ross, who will give an overview of the work ahead. So firstly, we will hear from Ben in just a moment, and he will give us an insight into just what we mean by the 30 by 30 target. It will be very familiar to some, perhaps less so to others. He will also give an insight into nature networks, what we mean by the term, how we're going to approach that, and how we're going to take this forward, and the timescales and engagement that we'll be looking for. We'll then hear from a panel of stakeholders. We've got some very, interesting perspectives from a wide range of individuals, and we're hoping that will kind of help us kind of set the scene and give us different perspectives on how this work might unfold and the opportunities that will arise from it to address the challenges that Lorna so ably set out. Then finally, we'll set give you the overview of the timeline for the work and the next steps. Throughout the session, we will be offering some polls. We want to get some thoughts and engagement. You'll understand there's 130 people in the room, so it's not really the kind of format for a discussion and a question and answer session, because there's a lot of people and we've got a lot to cover. So the intention of today is to set the scene, introduce the work, and get your views on how we can engage you and how we can work with you and how you'd like to be involved going forward. So we'll try and do that through these kind of headline polls. We'll take that information away, and on the basis of that, we'll help refine the programme and the approach going forward. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope this will be a good way to kick this work off, and really looking forward to the various contributions this afternoon. So with that, I will pass over to Ben Ross, and he will give us a little bit more insight into the work ahead.
So Yeah, I just echo those comments. It's amazing to see so many people here on what is a really exciting day and the start of something quite special. Today is about setting the scene, I guess, and the start of this process. So I wanted to spend a few minutes giving an overview of what this is all about, and as Eileen says, what we mean by nature networks and what 30 by 30 is, and how this fits in with everything else that's going on. And in doing that, we've got to look at the context, and the Minister talked about this as well. I think many of you may have seen this before, but it starkly sets out the current and potential trajectories for biodiversity, and particularly the rate of loss that we have at the moment, but also the potential to bend that curve back upwards through sustained effort. So that's really important on so many levels, which we all know, but fundamentally the point is that we rely on nature for our own survival, that we need the food, the air, the water, climate, well-being that it provides, and that we need to act here. So we have this shared challenge in terms of bending that curve there, and that requires action in lots of areas, and the new Scottish Biodiversity Strategy, which we've heard about, will help deliver that. But we're talking about a part of that today, and integration is important here as well. But this is particularly about area-based conservation and what 30 by 30 and nature networks is all about. Okay, so from a policy perspective, here's the picture, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but the important point here is the interrelationship between nature networks and 30 by 30, in that 30 by 30 sits within that broader nature network, and I'll talk a bit more about what they may mean shortly. But behind this, and again, as the Minister said, is the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Global Biodiversity Framework, of which 30 by 30 is that global commitment there. But also at a national level, we've got the 2020 Biodiversity Statement of Intent and Programme for Government, where nature networks and 30 by 30 are key commitments there. So what's a nature network? And forgive my rather crude drawings here, but at its simplest level, it's just about connection. Connectivity is key to helping nature thrive, especially in the face of the pressures that we have at the moment and rapid change. But it also helps provide all of those additional benefits to all of us that I mentioned earlier. So to put it a different way, an effective nature network, it develops and connects those nature-rich sites, such as protected areas, or restoration sites or other environmental projects, through a series of habitat corridors or stepping stones there. It improves that connectivity. So given that, what's the idea here and what's the ask? So as we've heard already, the aspirations for connection, and the idea is to develop a national framework for nature networks that guides how we deliver that from the bottom up, so that local nature networks can deliver those local and regional priorities to that greater whole of improved connectivity across the country. And there's three elements to that work, and that's about developing that national framework. So what the vision and the principles are, and what the strategic components are, and the links with elements like larger landscape scale projects. But it's also about what the principles are for how you translate that national strategy down to regional and local levels. And really importantly, it's about identifying all of the policy linkages, because this covers a lot. And it's how that fits in and complements those relevant policies at those different levels. That framework will also be about identifying the key roles and responsibilities of everybody involved there. So that's the national framework there, and that's one output. But there's two others as well. So the first is to develop a toolbox here about how we can help to facilitate nature networks to happen and to grow. So how to initiate them, what they need, where they could be financed, those policy linkages, where there may be other means of support and skills there. And the final element is about learning as we go. So working with people on the ground to learn, to understand what those barriers are, what those tools and needs are, so that we can feed that back into the toolbox. So we'd be looking to initially tag on to a small number of projects that we can learn from and help build that toolbox to enable others. So that's nature networks, but on to 30 by 30. And the bottom line for that is about protecting and conserving at least 30% of land and sea for nature by 2030. And that text that you see there it comes from the draft Global Biodiversity Framework. But there's important terms in there that help set the scene. So they are about being effective, about connectivity, about how important they are for biodiversity. But the other important point to note here is that it's about protected areas, but it's about much more. It's about other effective approaches to area-based conservation, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But where are we at the moment? Well, it depends on how you do your maths. We're somewhere between 18 and 23%. It depends on whether you include national parks or not. But that leaves a shortfall, and it leaves a big shortfall there, you know, that you may be talking about something about the size of Perth and Kinross there. So that task is big for us, and it isn't that long a time period for which to do it. And that task's for us. And when I say us, I mean us. We've got to work out how we're going to do this. We've only got a year to set out that framework. Then we've got to set out about how we actually do it over the following 7 years. So that how is about developing the framework. Again, what it covers is the visions and principles, what the criteria are for inclusion of land, you know, what's protected areas, what are these other approaches there, what are the roles of protection and designation and governance there, what are the principles for monitoring and management, and again, how we ensure that we link up all of these policies together to be as effective as possible. And the second part of that is the implementation plan. Okay, so we know what we want to do. How are we going to do it there? What are the approaches that we're going to use to secure long-term effective management? What are the science and evidence needs? How do we collect the spatial data? How do we measure progress and success? What are the legislative implications? How do we fit that with the Natural Environment Bill programme? So there's lots and lots to be doing there. So before I finish, I'll try and sort of pull those two projects back together and so show how they complement each other and what the component parts are. And this is, like all of this is simplified, but the Nature Network encompasses all of this, but under three main headings there. So it has our protected areas, which you all know and are familiar with. And these are likely to be the nature-rich heart of that wider networks. But there's also opportunities in this process, and today is all about thinking about those opportunities, is to think about how we can improve our approach to them. So there's protected areas, and then there are these other effective area-based conservation measures, which you may have heard about, and I'm sure we'll hear much more about too in future. These are also known as OECMs to make it less of a mouthful there. But together with protected areas, they're likely to make up the at least 30% that we're talking about. And I think Nigel will touch upon this in his presentation too. But the crucial difference between protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures, these OECMs, is that they're not protected areas. So these are areas where there is a assured and effective delivery for nature in the long term. But they're not protected areas there. So there's lots of possibilities as to what might constitute an OECM, and that no doubt is going to be a big part of the discussion as we go forward here. And the final part there is, or the final piece of the puzzle, is about these additional approaches, those local approaches that support connectivity and delivery for nature. So things like, but not restricted to that, to open space strategies, green networks, specific projects, parks and the like. And they will play a vital role, and a dynamic one, I guess, that helps bind those jigsaw pieces together and produce that connectivity and resilience effectively to deliver positives for nature, and to go back to the start there, to bend the curve. So on that note, I'll stop. The idea was to explain these concepts as well as some of the parameters that we're going to have to work to here. And I hope that's worked, but we will find that out shortly. But in the meantime, I'll hand back to Eileen before coming back later on to give a roundup as to how how on earth we're going to do this. And we, again, I will emphasize how we will do this and take the work forward.
Thank you, Ben. That was really helpful. I'm tempted to say no pressure then, because I think what you've set out is a huge challenge, but actually a really exciting opportunity. And you know, this is a game changer, I think, for many of us. Most people here have probably been involved in environmental work for many years, probably decades, and this is probably one of the biggest opportunities that we have in front of us to really make a difference and really turn protected areas from, you know, these really high quality, sort of slightly isolated sites in some cases, to a network of really effective places where we can take landscape scale interventions and really bend the curve of biodiversity loss. So what we're going to do now is hear from two different speakers who I hope are going to give us some really kind of inspiring and perhaps sort of, you know, challenging different thoughts about how we might take this forward and set the scene and kick this work off, because we just want to make sure that people think creatively. We, you know, at the start of the process, we want to get ideas, we want to get thoughts, we want to make this a co-produced. Nobody has all the answers here, so we're really looking forward to getting different people's perspectives. So I'm going to introduce first, we're really lucky to have with us Nigel Dudley, who's going to speak for probably just about 10 minutes. Nigel's a fellow of the United Nations Environmental Programme. He's a member of 3 IUCN commissions and has been actively working with the World Commission on Protected Areas. So I think nobody better than to tell us, you know, what we can do and to give us some thoughts. So over to you, Nigel.
Lovely. Thanks, Eileen. I'm going to share my screen as well. I'm going to assume you can see that.
Yes, we can. Thank you, Nigel.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to speak, and really excited by what's happening. I'm speaking to you today from just the edge of the Snowdonia National Park in Wales. So the Minister mentioned the CBD process and the meeting last week. I've got to tell you, it's still a mess. Target 3 is a real mass of square brackets and lack of decision. But there have been some things that have come through very constantly over the last 3 years, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, but which give us hope that we actually are going in a constant direction here. And also, almost 100 countries have now signed up to the High Ambition Coalition's target of 30 by 30, which means whatever happens in the CBD, and we still don't quite know because we don't have the final meeting, there's a momentum growing towards this, which for those of us that have been involved for a long time and can remember the times when a target of 10% was regarded as ludicrous, it's an incredible moment, as both Eileen and the Minister said. Much of what I'm going to say in the next few minutes draws on a report that we did for UK DEFRA looking at best practice in delivering this target. That it's not by any means the last word, but that's the basis of what I'm talking about. So what does a target mean? It's a global target, 30% globally, which means that it's not necessarily for every country, but it's for you know, it'll be balanced overall. Many countries have themselves committed to 30%. It's both land and sea. It involves both protected areas and OECMs. I'll come back to that. And it's for biodiversity, but also a lot for people. And if you look at the 7 things at the bottom, before we've really talked a lot about area when we're talking about protected areas, but this time there's a lot more emphasis on effectiveness, interconnectivity, on equitable management, and on integration. And so what I want to do for the next 8 minutes is just quickly run through some of the implications of that in Scotland. In our report, we put a lot of effort into territories of Indigenous peoples and local communities, because globally that's where the new areas are going to come from. And the role of Indigenous peoples is critical. It is predicated on them agreeing this, working with them. And one of the things that the UK government wanted us to do was look at how we go about doing that, how we make those bridges, often to communities that have been under pressure for a long time, rightly suspicious of outsiders. but it is also local communities. And so from a Scottish point of view, that means that you're going to be working with places like Sint, Egg, places where communities have, maybe the first time for a long time, some control over their land. And so progress is going to be very much a matter of negotiation, a matter of bringing communities with you on a common vision, listening to their vision, and building up into a hopefully sort of national process of building a protected and conserved area network. A very different way from the way we've been working hitherto. Ben mentioned other effective area-based conservation measures as places outside protected areas that deliver biodiversity. And there's three main types. There's what we call ancillary conservation, areas where completely accident that there's conservation benefits, but there still are benefits. Secondary conservation areas where there's some interest in conservation, but it's not the priority. And then there's going to be a few places which really are managed as protected areas, as if they were protected areas, but where the governing body doesn't want to be recognised as a protected area. Excuse me. And that would be places where, if you're recognised as a protected area, that there's all sorts of restrictions on what you can do. So unlikely to be a big issue in the UK, but very important in some parts of the world. So, for example, Scapa Flow, a war grave, very strictly protected, but not because of nature, but very rich marine biodiversity. That's the kind of places you might be looking at in Scotland. Military training areas. This is Dartmoor. This is actually in Dartmoor National Park, and I'll come back to that at the moment. But military training areas, often very rich biodiversity. The military can be persuaded to think about that quite a lot, but they're not protected areas. So I'm not going to go through this, but we've gone through a long process of thinking through a kind of decision tree for how governments might start to make those kind of decisions. Are we looking at a protected area? Are we looking at an OECM? Are we looking at something else? But the other major difference is in the extra emphasis on effectiveness. And one of the things that we're recognizing in countries which already have a lot of area protected, but it may not be delivering all the biodiversity benefits we want, the effort may be more in improving management than it is in building new areas. And in Scotland, that's probably going to be the case for you as well. It's not, you're going to be looking for new areas, but also strengthening biodiversity outputs from existing areas. And it's interesting that both the British Ecological Society and also UK DEFRA have said that in their opinion, national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty in England and Wales will not at the moment meet the 30% goal. So that means places like Cairngorm National Parks, maybe wouldn't count at the moment. Cairngorm's slightly unfair to use an example because I think it is actually probably nearer than most other national parks. But the kind of work that I saw in Cairngorm when I was there in the summer, that are rewilding, replacing non-native species and so on, that's the kind of process that we may be going through in many of our national parks over time, working with communities, getting consensus, moving forward to increase the effectiveness. That may be in many areas more important than new areas. How to invest? Sustainable funding options in the past were sort of things like handicrafts for local people. Now we've got to be a lot more canny. We're not going to get enough from that. So it's going to be things like really looking at the tourism benefits, really looking at things like payment for ecosystem services, looking at carbon sequestration, climate change, carbon budgets, and thinking through how protection can be funded in the long term, recognizing that it's dangerous to rely entirely on governments. We also have to work out how to measure benefits. We're going to be working with different owners. OECMs are not going to have conservationists managing them, so we have to persuade them to monitor. We're also going to be monitoring not just for biodiversity. If you look at the types of aims, there are a lot of social aims, so we need to be measuring some of those benefits as well. And that's the kind of thing that as conservationists, we don't know how to do. So we're going to have to talk to social scientists, talk to other expertise to build our monitoring systems in the future. And we also need to place this in a wider context. The Minister mentioned the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the Sustainable Development Goals. We reckon at least 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals are heavily supported by protected areas. So is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, carbon sequestration. So is land degradation neutrality targets from the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. So are targets from about forest, Ramsar targets on wetlands. So we need to build our 30% and stretch out and make sure that governments recognise that it's delivering on many more things than just biodiversity. So to wrap up, if we build a business case, we need to know whether we're looking at mainly new protected areas or existing protected areas and making the latter more effective. If the former, where they're going to be, location critical, connectivity is critical, what kind of governance and management models we need, how to get the best funding package, what supportive legislation and policies we need to be in place. And this is where the government plays a key role because it sets the framework. How we measure benefits, and I want to stress that again because I think that a good monitoring system is often the most important thing in terms of delivering effectiveness, because it gives us an opportunity to do real adaptive management. Is often forgotten. And then we need to scale up from individual projects to an overall systematic change. So that's all I have to say. I'm going to leave you with a view from Untitled that I was lucky enough to take about a month ago. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nigel. That's extremely useful. I think you've really given us the sort of challenge. You know, it's not just about the where, that's the easy bit. It's about, you know, what do we need to put in place to make that work, to make it effective, and monitoring and ensuring that we have that kind of opportunity to respond and improve is clearly at the heart of what we need to do. So that's absolutely fantastic. I'm now going to invite Dougie Peedle, sorry, apologies, from Scottish Wildlife Trust, and I think he's also speaking on behalf of Scottish Environment Link, to probably give us a perspective a bit nearer home. And then after that, we're gonna just take a few moments to just do a few polls and just kind of share some questions with you. But over to you, Dougie.
Yeah, thank you, Eileen. What I really want to do is focus on the why, what, where, when and how for nature networks in Scotland, hopefully building on what the Minister and other speakers have said already today. In terms of the why, I don't think I need to spend too long on this. It's now widely recognised that we're in a nature and climate emergency and that they're the greatest threats that we face. Scottish Government has recognised this, and I think it's a widely held view across the community now. But quite critically, if we're serious about addressing the nature emergency, we cannot do this without fully embracing nature networks across Scotland. 30 by 30, which we've heard from Nigel, absolutely necessary, but by no means sufficient by itself to address the nature crisis in Scotland. There just simply isn't enough space to address the crisis by protected areas alone. Connectivity has got to be at the heart of what we do in Scotland. It's key, and the evidence is clear. It's supported internationally by people like IPBES, IUCN, and also closer to home, the Lawton Review in the UK, setting out clearly the benefits from connectivity. But it's not just about biodiversity as well. We've heard already the need to deliver multiple benefits, and nature networks can really take that to the heart of community, delivering benefits across health, climate, economy, and overall well-being, that ultimate goal now of the National Strategy for Economic Transformation. So in terms of the what, just building on what Ben said, put simply, they are nature's highways, connecting good quality habitat, allowing wildlife to move freely across the landscape, increasing resilience and reducing the isolation of species. If you want to think a little bit more clearly about what that is, they can be physical, not purely physical in every case. Think about green roofs and street trees in the urban environment, new native and riparian woodland in rural areas. All these things have ecological connectivity at the heart, and it's really vital in the approach in Scotland. Also, I think it's important to set out what they are not. They're certainly not a mapping exercise. Mapping is important, but just mapping existing green spaces and habitats is not a nature network. We have to go further than that if we really want to address the trends in biodiversity that have been well documented in Scotland. In terms of where, well, stealing a little bit from Paul McCartney at Glastonbury, it's a case of here, there and everywhere. The programme for government is set out clearly, as the Minister said, that they need to be delivered in every local authority across Scotland. Also, quite importantly, they must be matched by an equivalent approach in the marine environment, looking at ecologically coherent MPAs and high performance marine protected areas as well. Also, we can look elsewhere. There are examples that we can draw on. The European Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 sets out the ambition to build a truly coherent trans-European network. Also, there's examples in countries like the Netherlands, Spain, the Baltics, and closer to home in England. Just south of the border, the 25-year Environment Plan set out a major commitment to develop a nature recovery network. They've already been through a pilot phase south of the border in 2020 and 2021. Also, DEFRA have consulted on the strategy for rolling these out across England to deliver the National Nature Recovery Network. So there are examples and experience that we can draw on and learn from. Thinking a bit more about the how, which is absolutely fundamental given where we are in Scotland and given this momentum that we have behind both protected areas and nature networks. The how must involve some form of opportunity mapping. That's what's been done elsewhere, looking at how we can improve and extend existing habitats and what brings the biggest biodiversity benefits. As I say, that's been at the heart of all these different approaches that we've seen internationally and something that we need to repeat here in Scotland. We actually think there is a blueprint in Scotland. We've worked with Edinburgh Council as part of the Thriving Green Spaces project to help deliver the Edinburgh Nature Network over the last couple of years. What we've done there is used what's called the Ecological Coherence Protocol, and there's 3 important steps that are involved in that, which I think it's just worth dwelling a little bit on at this point in time. Yes, first step is creating the map showing the different types of habitat across the urban area. But quite importantly, there's 2 further steps which are absolutely fundamental. Secondly, it's modelling the capacity and the demand for ecosystem services, really understanding what the benefits are and where they might be realised across the ecosystem. And then thirdly, it's also really important that we involve communities. The third step is consultation workshops with a range of experts and community residents to identify what the best actions are for people and nature in that area. It's really something that Julie might be able to expand on in the session further down the line, so I won't spend too much time on that. But within the how, we also need to think about resources. Again, not stealing too much from the Beatles, but often with biodiversity, it's a case of you never give me your money. But they're not expensive nature networks. We've seen in Edinburgh that over the 2 years, what's been achieved there has been achieved with £50,000 a year. That means that if we were to do that across each local authority in Scotland, it would only cost £1.5 million a year for 2 years. Very small beer, really, considering the sums that are spelt elsewhere and really the benefits that could be realised from that spending. Yes, beyond that initial 2-year period, there's likely to be a need for more funding. Well, actually, we've got tools that we can already use to help extend that process and approach further. We have a Planning Act which already commits to an infrastructure levy which can be used by local authorities to invest in green and blue infrastructure. But at the moment, that has not been enacted. If that was enacted, we've got a clear delivery mechanism and financial flow that could flow into nature networks at the local level. Also, the recent resource spending review set out that of the 660 million in income from ScotWind, there is about 210 million that's going to be used from 2026 and 2027 onwards to secure lasting benefits for communities. There's a direct reference to that being used to address issues around the biodiversity crisis as well. So clearly there is funding available, and also there's potential new innovative approaches as well, which can be used to back up those potential funding sources going forward. Two other areas I think which I'll just dwell on quickly, absolutely important in the how and the delivery of nature networks. The first is looking at the planning framework to make sure that this properly galvanizes nature networks. At the moment, it doesn't appear to do that in what we've seen so far. We need an NPF4 that can set out in detail how local authorities must go about this. And that's, choose my words carefully there, it must be something that they have to do, not an option or a nice to have. And they must be clearer in terms of how they can be delivered. Also, I think going back to what Ben said, we not only need that bottom-up approach in terms of what can be done at the local level, we also need an overall strategic approach at the national level, a top-down approach, making sure that what we do is joined up and coordinated. And quite clearly, there could be an important role for NatureScot there as well. Finally, in terms of the when, well, again, just to steal something else from the Beatles, I think quite clearly it's yesterday. Given the trends that we've seen in biodiversity, we need that connectivity now. And that's echoed by the NatureScot review, the seminal review of the economics of biodiversity, where it said quite clearly, nature recovery is within our grasp. We know what we need to do and how to do it. The time to act is now. So I think absolutely fitting that I finish on that point, because nature networks are fundamental to what we want to achieve in Scotland, both in terms of biodiversity, climate, and also wider aims around health and well-being. I'll stop there, and hopefully that's given you a real flavour of the opportunities that we've got in Scotland.
Thank you very much, Dougie. I mean, those are two really excellent introductory pieces, and I think give us the flavour of just, you know, the challenge, but also the opportunity and the different things that we need to bear in mind. And I'm going to take away the here, there, and everywhere, because I think that could be our motto, because that is certainly something that I think needs to be at the heart of our thinking. So what I'm going to do now is, I know there's been some comment in the chat, and please feel free to input into that. We're not going to try and capture and answer these questions, but they will all feed into our thinking and our summary report of this session. What we're going to do now is we're going to pop a question in the poll. And again, if you want to comment on the answers will pop up immediately, and you can comment on that if you like. We won't sort of enter into a discussion now, because there's really too many people in this forum to sort of orchestrate that kind of discussion. But all of these questions will help us shape how we go forward and how we kind of continue this engagement and structure future sessions. So Abby, I think, is going to do the mechanics. And the first question we're going to ask is, based on what's been discussed so far, do you feel you understand the challenge? It's just a pretty simple, but it's a kind of baseline as to how sort of well-informed or how comfortable people feel with what we're setting out to do. So feel free to just put in your immediate thoughts there, and then we've got a follow-up question, which we'll put just in a minute or two. I think you can see real life kind of responses coming in, which I think is broadly encouraging. I think there's a sort of more than 60% are feeling they understand the challenge, and 30% or roughly about are getting there, which I think is what we'd expect, because this is quite a big subject. It's quite a big topic, and there is quite a lot to get your head round, and that is part of the job as we go forward, to make sure that we do all have a common understanding of what the challenge is, and and are all on the same page on how we approach it. So I think what we'll do is we will just immediately, these are really just for sort of, taking the temperature and helping us guide our work forward. So don't feel too precious about answering them. But I think the second question we wanted to ask, just again to get the sort of flavour of the mood, is based on what's been discussed so far, can you see the opportunities for you? And again, it's a simple kind of quick poll that we'd like you to input into. And again, it looks like a broadly similar sort of response that there's a substantial majority of people that do understand the challenge and see the opportunities. Oh, sorry, that's the first one. Oh, there we go. Are the results of the second question appearing? I'm not sure if I'm getting the same feed. You can tell me, Ben, what's
you're right. It's roughly the same. It's about sort of 65% yes, 30% getting there, and 5% no.
And that's absolutely fine. You know, there is definitely lots more that we need to do just to kind of illustrate what we're trying to do, set out that vision, set out the principles. And I think the clarity of this will emerge, and has to emerge fairly quickly. So that's one of the tasks that we need to take forward. Okay, well, thank you very much. That's a really good start to the session. Where we're going to go now is we have invited a range of other speakers to very quickly give us a sort of 2-3 minute kind of overview of their thinking around this challenge and the questions that we've set for all of those panel members. So feel free to approach them as you want. But the questions we set was, in light of what we've heard so far, what do you see as the opportunities of 30% by 2030 and the use of nature networks? And secondly, and I think what will be really interesting insight is, we asked what's the one principle or element of this work that you would see as being key in its development. Now, we've invited a handful of speakers, and I think starting us off will be Isabelle Mercer, who's a senior policy advisor at RSPB. And again, I think sort of speaking on behalf of Scott Environment Link. So Isabelle, if you want to kick us off. Really interested in your thoughts.
Thanks, Eileen. That's great, and many thanks for the invitation to participate in today's event. It's been brilliant to hear the speakers so far, and just great to see so many people kind of interested in engaging with this topic. So Digi's presentation has set out Link's hopes for nature networks really well, so I'm going to focus on the opportunities for the 30 by 30 target. So Link sees this as a chance for a real step change for our protected areas to make them really work for nature. And this is basically ensuring they're not just lines on a map, but they're driving nature's recovery. And we want to see them at the heart of a kind of wider programme of ecosystem restoration underneath that biodiversity strategy that's been talked about already. So Link thinks that in order to count towards the 30% target, land should meet 2 conditions. They're quite simple, the first of which is that they have to be protected over the long term from damage. And the second is that they'd have to be, the nature that those places support would have to be in good or recovering condition. So it's all about quality as well as quantity. So that comes back to what Nigel was saying around effectiveness. So we've already heard a bit about why protected areas are so important. We know that without protected areas, biodiversity would be much worse off today. But we do know that our existing protected areas aren't always working as well for nature as they could. They're not always in good condition or managed or monitored well. We've got issues with connectivity, as we've already heard, and gaps for some species and habitats. So we see this as a major chance to turn around the fate of these protected areas, build on what we have, and make our protected areas better, bigger, create more of them, and make them more joined up. This will contribute to our nature recovery targets and help our protected areas to become more resilient in the face of a changing climate. I also want to say this will deliver many other socio-economic benefits that are very important today. So this can create green jobs, support local nature positive economies, and many other wider benefits, flood mitigation, and many other services that are really important. We also see it as a chance to protect many of our irreplaceable habitats like ancient woodlands and peatlands, and a chance, as we've already heard, to develop creative and new ways of protecting some of these places through that development of OECMs, and also a chance to do protected areas better. So have a collective conversation about where things haven't worked, where we could improve, for instance, how we communicate and celebrate these sites, how we better involve people, and how we make sure that they're dynamic enough in the face of climate change. And we also see it as a chance to collectively tackle pressures on our protected areas more strategically, and this is a real opportunity for more collaborative working. So NGOs have a crucial role to play, but working much more with other landowners, other stakeholders to work at much greater scales to tackle landscape scale pressures like deer management and invasive species on protected sites. And then the final thing I'd quickly mention is that LINC sees also for both of these projects a major opportunity for reforming and transforming national parks. So we've heard a bit of a debate already around whether national parks could count. We don't feel that they could count in their entirety in their current form, but there's a massive opportunity there for national parks to do more for nature and not only start to count more areas within the parks towards the 30%, but for them to play a key role in nature networks as well. And I'll stop there. Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you, Isabelle. I think you made some really important points there, and I think that green jobs and the wider benefits is something that we need to keep in mind, and it is about, you know, selling the benefits of protected areas and 30 by 30 and the multiple benefits that we can achieve from this. So that communication and involving people is going to be key to spreading that message, and I think getting the support. So thank you for that. I'm now going to hand over to Julie Dewar, who's the Senior Planning Officer working for the City of Edinburgh Council. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it starts for local authorities. We have the Edinburgh process and the Edinburgh Declaration, which has recognised the importance of local authorities in this recovery. And I think that's the start of this, which is really important. I work in a planning department. There'll be many colleagues here from planning, from land management areas within local authorities, and it's the recognition of the part we can play in nature recovery. I'm not sure in the past necessarily local authorities were seen as part of that, but this is a real opportunity. Coming from planning, I think the most important thing we're going to have is the policy connections. You know, we have NPF4, as was mentioned, particular policies within there. We've worked for many years with trying to protect local nature conservation sites, which has been a challenge. We all know that urbanisation is a key loss of our ecology areas. So how can we better use this agenda to better protect those? Clear link in there to National Planning Framework 4. The policy 32, natural places, for those of you planners who know it, there was a debate around that. So very important that this is an opportunity seen to strengthen that and strengthen local nature conservation sites. We also have forest and woodland strategies. How do they play into this agenda? Open space strategies, many biodiversity action plans, where do they fit in? There's lots of work going on, and this is an opportunity to pull this all together so it has an overall agenda and not these separate agendas. I think the opportunity really comes as well to look at funding. I know you talked about Dougie, there not being too much, you know, $1.5 million a year or so, whatever the figure was used, but actually getting that funding is a challenge, and this is an opportunity to look at long-term funding. Some of my colleagues on this call will remember about 10 years ago we tried to get funding for a number of local authorities to survey local biodiversity sites, working with the record centres to almost look at a nature network, and the funding packages was considered that didn't really meet what was required. But going forward, this is an opportunity to say, looking at ecology, it's from the data, from the survey and the management long term. So we need to look at that opportunity to better support that funding. So there's real opportunity, but I think the challenges are going to be that policy framework that works and pulls all this together, and the value that local authorities can play in that in the longer term. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Some really important comments there. I think that policy coherence goes to the heart of what we need to do. We need this to work across sectors, across different kind of organisation and different elements of our work. And that probably will be key to unlocking some of the funding and the long-term support. So absolutely. And I think Ms. Slater made the comments earlier, local authorities have to be at the heart of this. And you know, Scotland has definitely set that in train through the Edinburgh process, and we need to follow through to help with the delivery. So thank you very much. It's great to get these different perspectives, and that's what we were really hoping to achieve with this session. So I'm going to invite now Alistair White, who's head of Plant Life Scotland and representing the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest. It's a partnership of a number of organisations, and I think he's going to give us an insight into their perspective on how this would work.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm Alistair, head of Plant Life Scotland, but as Eileen said, speaking on behalf of the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest, which is a voluntary partnership of more than 20 organisations come together to try to save Scotland's temperate rainforest, which is some people don't realise that we have a rainforest in Scotland, but we do. It's internationally important, but it's in very, very poor condition. It's fragmented, it's under threat from unsustainable levels of grazing and invasive non-native species. And only 30,000 hectares of rainforest remain in Scotland, which is a tiny fragment of what the land area could support, a tiny fragment of the rainforest zone, which really should cover the whole of the west coast of Scotland. Of the rainforest which does remain, just under half of that has protected status, usually through SSSI protection, and of those SSSI features, around about 50% of those features are in unfavourable condition. So what that means is that whilst site protection has obviously helped in preserving the last little fragments of rainforest and its important species, it hasn't worked at the scale required to bring about ecosystem scale recovery at the landscape scale. Now, this is largely because the pressures on the rainforest, those grazing pressures and the invasive non-native species, operate at the landscape scale. They don't recognise protected site boundaries, and there's a limit to what can be done at the level of an individual site to counter the effects of those threats. And also, small fragmented protected sites on their own can't bring about that landscape scale recovery. We need to do things differently, and this is where 30 by 30 and nature networks offer huge opportunities. If we think about those protected sites as biodiverse nodes, we can use those to then repopulate and restore the wider ecosystem by expanding out from those hotspots, protecting, restoring more land for nature, and tackling the threats of the scale they need to be tackled about to bring about real change. It's about delivering that network of protected areas and a nature network to bring about ecosystem restoration on a massive scale. So we're already part of the way there with the rainforest. Several years ago, Plant Life mapped both the existing areas of rainforest, the rainforest core areas, and also zones of opportunity, which are areas where the rainforest could expand into if conditions were more favourable. So that links to what Dougie was saying about the mapping strategically being so important. So we know what we have to do to start to expand and restore these areas. And now it's really a case of taking the opportunities afforded by 30 by 30 and nature networks to really do that. Our collaborative Rainforest Restoration Fund proposal, which we pulled together through the ASR, submitted to Scottish Government, offers a structured, costed mechanism for achieving that. And this ambitious approach, this approach of thinking big and thinking long term, I think it fits really well with 30 by 30 and with nature networks. So that's the opportunity to restore properly at landscape scale and to change how we think about nature. And the principle, the one principle I would want to highlight would be that principle of collaborative action. It's been a bit of a game changer, a bit of an eye-opener for me to be part of the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest, which brings together agencies, NGOs, land managers, community groups to all collaboratively, collectively develop a vision for how we could go about restoring the rainforest. So I would say that taking that principle forward into 30 by 30 and applying it much more widely across Scotland would have huge benefits. A truly collaborative approach, maybe through regional land use partnerships, if they're properly resourced, if they're properly supported, it could be a way of delivering that. But however the mechanism we arrive at is, that collaborative approach is really the only way of delivering the transformational change that we need. That was my point. Thank you.
Great, Alistair. I mean, all the speakers have really got to the nub and really given us some insights today. I'm going to pass on now. I think our last panel member is Michael Clark, who's the chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. So really great to get a land management perspective. And I think Michael will give us an insight into the contribution that farming and land managers can make to this agenda. So over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Good afternoon. It was a slightly sweaty moment for me because I don't think you could see me and I couldn't get in, but I'm here. Thank you. So I bring a message of hope, I think, from an army of change agents, which is on the ground producing food that is just waiting to be mobilized. So we're delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I've learned some expressions I didn't know before, like OECMs. I think we're happy to champion them. I think on my farm, I've got an area of primary conservation, and a lot of other farms have too. They might not be recognized as that, but there are areas that we absolutely safeguard for nature conservation. We need to keep the language simple. I think we can't use language like ecological coherence protocol when we're talking to farmers. We'll have to find a simpler way of doing it. But can I commend you on the process so far? I mean, it's been incredibly inclusive, incredibly bold, ambitious, led at a very high level, and it's felt good to be part of it. So thanks very much for including farmers in that and making it something that we can relate to and understand. Now, we need, don't we, transformative change at landscape scale. We know, and we will show Ms. Slater when she comes here within the next month or so, and we're just waiting for a date, that we've already got transformative change at farm scale. And it's incredible how quickly it can come. You know, the power of nature, the power of natural regeneration is extraordinary, and we'll show her that. The challenge we have from our group is to get that up to a landscape scale, to create this ripple effect. And I think we can, to do that, what we would like, please, is a less adversarial, more supportive relationship with you guys. Easier said than done, but DEFRA are trying to do it. You probably know that south of the border with farmers. If you smile and talk to us nicely, we'll smile and we'll reciprocate and we'll do our best. We'll put the oomph of the Nature Friendly Farming Network behind that sort of approach. So less adversarial, more supportive. We might need some minor regulatory change. We need the way farms are inspected and assessed for support to catch up with the new mindset that you've got in trying to advance to nature networks and 30 by 30. So we don't get penalized for taking land out of so-called production and put into nature areas of primary concern. You know, that should qualify, or that shouldn't disqualify you from support. We need a less prescriptive, more empowering approach. I've seen questions in the chat about AICS, environmental, schemes. We don't want tick boxes. That's not going to cut it for this. We need POBAS and all that. We outcome based and what farmers can, what they can do. And bespoke schemes would be great. I know they're looking at those in other parts of the UK too. There are farmers who would jump at bespoke schemes and they would act like a beacon, I think, for other farmers to follow. We would welcome targeted support, please, for networks like ours, other networks, like Soil Association, these people. And I don't mean money. We're not necessarily talking about money. We're talking about give us the platforms. You've got a place at Battleby. You had a conference sharing good practice a few years ago. Let's have more of those. If you give us the platforms, we'll get on them with you in a collaborative way, and we'll tell farmers what they can do to get us to help, to combat the biodiversity and nature crises. And I think what we'll try and do with you is create a new herd dynamic. You'll know that farmers are herd animals and they follow the herd. We have started with others to stimulate a new herd, which is going in a regenerative direction. And with your support, working together, all of us guys, we can get more farmers to go in that direction. And finally, if you could let us see a bit more of the roadmap. For us, we are disorientated, ladies and gentlemen. We've got so many pressures. We've had the caps gone. We've had a light, a big light for 40 or 50 years. Suddenly it's gone very, very dim and very dark. Scotland is leading the way in terms of carbon audits, biodiversity audits now, soil analysis. What comes after that? If you know what it's going to take, give us some milestones, some signposts towards this bold new future, and we will help you rewrite the future. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think a really good challenge to us that, you know, the appetite's there, the army of change agents. I like that. We need to have that kind of bold, ambitious platform and change the kind of nature of the discussion. So there's a supportive, collaborative environment. And I think that's certainly our intention. And, you know, I think you'll have got the message from across government. We have the political support to do this. So, you know, that's why we're kind of, you know, excited about this opportunity. Just to wrap up this session, we did invite the Scottish Land and Estates, and Karen Ramu, the policy advisors for Scottish Land and Estates, had intended and wanted to join us, but unfortunately there's family illness, so she isn't able to be here. But what we will do is share some of her comments and her thoughts in the material that we provide after the session today. I think that's been extremely valuable. I mean, we sought deliberately to get perspectives from different sort of actors, to use that slightly uncomfortable, and we do need to simplify the language, but from different people who have a different role to play. But the point we're trying to emphasize is that we need all these different perspectives to be around the table to make this really work, and to make sure that we are being sufficiently creative and doing things differently so we get that transformative change. I'm not going to try and sum up because there was far too much, but some really valuable contributions there. I mean, the messages I took away, which very much chime with our thinking, is that we need to be collaborative. You know, this is the opportunity to do something quite different. And I think we can do that in Scotland because although there are lots of players, you know, there is a sort of, you know, an alliance, there are networks, there are sort of, you know, reasonably well known ways, and we can get people together. And so we want to be collaborative. Policy coherence absolutely needs to be at the heart of what we're doing to make sure that all of the incentives, the regulation, the enabling platforms are there and help us, you know, move in the right direction. We definitely need to do more to sell the benefits of protected areas and networks. You know, what do they do for people? Because I suspect we all understand it. We all know it's not just about nature. It's about those, you know, whether it's flood, whether it's peatland restoration, whether it's carbon mitigation, whether it's nice places for people to go out and enjoy the countryside. You know, that's what these networks, and this is what 30 by 30 can achieve for us. And, you know, as Michael's illustrated, there are lots of people already on this journey, already transforming their land. And what we need to do is to be able to scale this up and make sure that, you know, it can operate at a different scale, and ensure that we have all of the different mechanisms in place to enable people to move in the direction that many want to, and to give that kind of security of the direction of travel and the roadmap, so people are willing and able to invest and change the way they do things. So that is absolutely what we wanted to get out of this panel, members. So thank you all very much for your contributions. We will no doubt hear from you all again in you know, the journey as we go forward. But I think that was a really good scene setter, and so thank you for your contributions. What we're going to do now is just have another poll. So we will just see if you can pop in some thoughts, and what we're going to do again, this is a more open-ended question. So what we want to do is, I think perhaps some of this is already emerging in the chat, but we'd like to see from you, where do you see the opportunities? Are there things you haven't heard in the discussion to date you think that we're kind of missing? So please feel free to add in your thoughts, and you know, we will pick these up and we will use this all in our thinking, just to make sure that we are capturing, you know, the whole breadth of thoughts and perspectives today. So feel free to engage in this poll. I'm contributing myself, so you'll just have to excuse me. So while I think this poll will sort of continue to be live, so feel free to just continue to contribute as we go forward. I'm now going to hand over to Ben, who's going to talk a little bit about next steps and the process that we're going to go through. So Ben, would you like to take over just now?
Thank you, Eileen. I hope you can see that. I'm back. I'm going to take Michael up on his challenge, I guess, about simplicity here, and it's absolutely about collaboration. But I wanted to come back and sort of round things up a little bit and talk about how we want to take this forward, because how we deliver this, and we've got to deliver it, is not dictated by us, by NatureScot. It is dictated by us all. The challenge there is for everybody. Yes, there's parameters within that, and there's basic principles that we've talked about. But in order to get to that best solution, it involves everybody there. So we want to take this forward using, and I guess this is the most technical I'll be, Michael, is through a co-design approach. And if I want to put that in its simplest terms, it's about involving people who are affected by something to come up with a joined up solution to it. So it's coming together with stakeholders, with interested parties, with yourselves to design or rethink that service or product. In this case, it's 30 by 30 and nature networks, and that is absolutely the approach that we want to do. We need to learn about the best way, learn from how we've done things in the past, and learn the best way of doing it. So that makes it really exciting, and it makes it very ambitious, and it makes it really collaborative as a process. But I'm convinced that it will help develop the best solution to this as well. But those sort of exciting and ambitious things also bring with it a bit of, because they're new, they bring with it risks and uncertainty there. So we can't necessarily map out exactly what things will look like, either the process or the solution, because we've yet to develop it. We have yet to develop it. But what I'll try to do is show the timelines that we're working to in the next slide, and they will shape our approach. You know, there's no one way in which to do this process, to do co-design. Yes, we've got to work within those parameters that we've talked about there, and we've got to fit with some immovable things like legislative drafting and the timescales there. But that's all doable. It will be a challenge there, but we've also got to do it in that collaborative way. And again, echoing Michael, is saying that this is about not an adversarial approach. It's about respect for each other and trying to develop shared goals. You get a shared goal, you will get a shared goal, you get a longer term, more sustainable solution. So this is new. So it's a really new way of doing things, but I am confident it will produce the best results. Yes, it will be a challenge, and that challenge will come down the line. We will have some difficult discussions, but if we do that in the right way, then I think we will realise those opportunities that everybody has articulated today, and that the overwhelming majority of people see those opportunities. So we've got to grasp that. So in terms of timelines there, the co-design approach launches today, and today's not really co-design. I've talked a lot there. The co-design will start when we're sitting in rooms or virtual spaces to discuss this. But we launch it today. We say this is the challenge. Are you up for it? And I'm getting the view that people are up for it. I should also say, we've got a single timeline here, but actually the approaches to 30 by 30 and nature networks will work in parallel. They are similar, and I hope we've articulated how they are interrelated with each other. But they will go along jointly. So they will both follow a similar timescale, but those discussions will be separate. And the reason for that is that, yes, there'll be some overlap with the stakeholders and people involved, but I don't think it's a complete overlap there. So after the summer holidays, that's when the co-design approach kicks in earnest. That's where we spend that period of time. You can see roughly we've got there April to November. There is that we have these ways of trying to develop, explore that problem, explore the challenges, and start to develop and then refine what those frameworks will look like, what those visions are, the key principles, and what the potential approaches will be. So that will happen through a series of online and in-person methods. And you know, this is the start of that co-design. We will be asking you, you know, what method suits you, what is the best way of doing this. So that will happen with these series of different fora, let's call them, by which we can discuss this. And you know, we're keen to bring in as many people as possible, or as is necessary throughout this process, and trying to go beyond what our usual reach is there and bring in some of those seldom heard voices as well. And we will do that according to the timescales there. At the same time, we'll be looking to develop some linkages with some of those possible pilot projects with nature networks that I talked about, how we can learn from them, think about the opportunities, the solutions, the innovative tech and things like that that will help deliver this, and develop those toolkits that will help other networks grow. And that the implementation plans there as well will be developed in parallel to this. As we know how we're going to do this, we have to develop that plan as to how we'll do it. You know, the data analysis, the legal requirements, the different options that are available, what the evidence is, all of that will be happening at the same time. And then we move to ideally being in a situation where we finish that consultation, because in effect, this is one long consultation. We finish that consultation and get those frameworks out, and we are ready to be running and doing stuff on the ground within a year's time. So that's the time scales there. They're indicative. This is a fluid process, but that's what we're looking at the moment. So the next steps after today, well, first off, the really important part is we're interested to hear how you want to be involved. We need your help to shape how best to do this, how you want to input. Do you want online workshops? Do they work best, or in-person events? We can do both. You know, do you want input throughout or just on particular parts, or do you just want to be kept in the loop? And based on that input, we can look to pull together that program of the different ways by which you can input. And as you saw in the timeline there, whatever this looks like, it will be happening over the next few months and into autumn. So all of that information and updates will be provided on the Nature Network section of the website. But if you also want to be involved, and please spread the word. This is going to be recorded and available to others, but please spread the word. If you want to be involved, then you can be put on our mailing list as well, which is at Nature Networks, which is naturenetworks@nature.scot. Again, you'll find that on the website there. Okay, so with that, I will stop, and I hope this is the start of something really good, challenging but good, and I look forward to seeing everyone soon as we carry on along this process. And thanks for your time today.
Yeah, as Ben was talking about there, it's this kind of final question on how would you like to input to this work as it develops. So we've got those various different methods, kind of in person or virtual, and the degree to which you want to be feeding into it. So yeah, if you could pop anything in the poll there, we'll be using this going forwards. I can certainly see from that last poll that we're kind of sitting at 80 responses there. So there's a great amount of information that we're able to capture, like even from this kind of initial event. So that's really great, and it's kind of feels like it's been really worthwhile.
I hope everything today has made sense. I'm reassured by the optimism in all of the responses and all of the contributions from the panel members, which is really greatly received. So thank you. As I've said, I don't underestimate the challenge here, but if there's a collective will to be able to do this, and I believe doing it in the right way, then I think that is a great thing. I hope that everyone will remain involved with this and will contribute. And I think I would just say thank you to everybody for their time today and for being part of this work. So thank you all.
Well, I was just going to say, I think this has been absolutely excellent and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm feeling really motivated and exciting about the journey ahead. I think we've set out a collective challenge. We want to be bold, ambitious, but we want to be collaborative. And, you know, we need to build on the expertise, the experience, the knowledge that we've got in the room and elsewhere. And I think we can do that. And I think there's, you know, there's an appetite and this political support for us to do something different and to really make a difference here. So I'm really hoping we can take forward this work in this kind of spirit of collaboration and just make sure that we, you know, we are better than the sum of our individual parts, which I certainly think everybody here seems to be welcoming. So thank you much for your input, and hopefully we will continue the conversation. So thanks very much for your time. It's really appreciated, and we look forward to working with you again.